people want to skip steps. And anyone that knows that it's really about the process, right? Like it's an infinity game, whatever it is you're trying to do, right? It's not like a basketball game or a football game. Like we're playing for the long haul. So there's no end to what we're doing.
The reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast was because I started going to church and I had some profound experiences, realizations, but I'm very much still seeking and learning. And I kind of wanted to understand someone who's way further down along that path and talk to them about the experience and like how I should navigate moving forward.
Yeah.
So,
Dope.
Yeah, to give you a little context about my own journey with faith, I started meditating 4 years ago. Believe in God, believe in some power. Went to church maybe a month ago, and the pastor said at the end of the line, at the end of the service, ask someone you love, if you pray for them, what should you pray for? And that hit me at such a deep level. I just started bawling.
Really?
Crying my eyes out.
Wow.
For 10 minutes straight, 15 minutes straight. Never had that experience before. And I was like, what is going on here? It's like, I've been selfish for 28 years. I never asked my mom or dad or brother or grandparents that simple question. How in the world had I gone through that without asking that? And that hit me at such a deep level that, previously to that experience, I was watching your videos and I was curious because there's no one out there who's able to, from my limited vantage point, it doesn't seem like there's anyone who's able to bridge the gap between the modern culture and the Bible. And you do that in such an amazing way.
Thank you.
So that gives you a little context for how I'm framing this conversation.
That's dope. What a great introduction.
Yeah. So I guess if I think about the person listening or watching, is at a similar place. Why do we follow people on YouTube, or why do we follow people at all? It's because we're in step 1 or 2 of our journey, and we see people at step 10 who know the road.
Sure.
So I guess from my perspective, where should I start?
In terms of faith?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I mean, I think we start with Jesus, right? Like it all starts and ends with Jesus. I think the beautiful part about that is that there's this amazing dichotomy where Jesus accepts us where we are, but he expects so much more of us, right? And he's along for whatever journey we're going to go through, but then there's also a level of dying to self. You know, Jesus says, he who loses his life will gain it, right? So there's a lot of these really cool paradoxes, and people struggle with paradoxes, right? Because it's like, well, that's a contradiction. It's not. It's a paradox. You just got to think a little bit, right? And so I was in a similar place when I was younger and growing up. I grew up in Soviet Russia. Technically Azerbaijan, but it was all the Soviet Union. And I'm ethnically Armenian. My mom was adopted by an Armenian family. My father's Armenian. We grew up in Baku, and we didn't have faith church. Like the government was the church, right? So it's like the whole like take God from people so you can be their God, right? Like that. They did that. They really did that. Now like Russia's like all Orthodox Christian in this whole bit. So having my identity depleted as I was Armenian, which is the oldest Christian nation in the world, not growing up with any faith, while having this rich faith in our like legacy, right? And then coming to America and then finally like getting to experience the Armenian Apostolic Church as more of like a community hub. And fast forward to when I finally gave my life to Jesus, it is a similar, scales fall from the eyes and you go, oh man, like I've really just been about me. Like I've been about me trying to build my castle instead of God's kingdom, right? And then there's all these moments and people that God puts in my life, and I'm just so locked in on me. I'm my own God, right? And I think, again, like with Jesus is like it's the surrender aspect, right? Repent and believe. Repent means to change your mind, change your trajectory. Believe in Jesus. Belief is a confidence spectrum, right? It's not a binary, right? It's not I believe that eating chicken and broccoli is going to give me abs, right? No, I have enough confidence that eating chicken and broccoli and strength training and doing 10,000 steps a day over the long haul will get me said result. I start having certainty after I've eaten chicken and broccoli for a month. And then I go, wait, I look better. And then you do it for 6 months. And then maybe you go on vacation, but you didn't know where the ladder is. You know what the truth is, right? And you keep leaning back into the confidence that you had, right? And so I think sometimes people don't view faith as confidence. They view faith as certainty. And it's not certain. You just start with placing your confidence in Jesus and saying, I believe he is who he says he is. I believe that he lived the life I could never live. I believe he died the death I should have died on the cross in my place for my sin. And I believe, there's enough there that I believe that he rose. And I believe that the New Testament is reliable. And if the New Testament is reliable, then I can trust what Jesus said about the Old Testament. So that's reliable. And so you just start there. Like you just start with the confidence aspect. And then as I have confidence in Jesus being who he is, then in hindsight, I start applying his ways. I start living his ways. I start loving my neighbor as myself. I start doing unto others. I start loving God with all my heart, all my soul, all my mind. I start living a life of submission, seeking the fruit of the Holy Spirit, kindness, gentleness, peace, joy, self-control. I start submitting my body to him as my form of worship, which Romans 12:1-2 says, right? Do not be conformed by the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, right? And as I did that in high school, it was a 2-year journey of wrestling with God and theology and which God, is Jesus really God? Is he the only way? I wrestled with that for a while. And then finally arriving at like this, no, he is who he is, and I could trust his ways. And then the certainty and the I know came in hindsight of placing my confidence, right? So I placed my confidence saying, I think this is real. I have enough, there's enough here from a reasonable standpoint. This is real. And as I place that confidence, then I look back and go, the hand of God has been all over my life. And even when I mess up, he's still there and he's still willing to work with me through my mess and through my sin and forgive me. And I think when we approach it that way, it demystifies things, right? Like it's very simple. Like the truth is simple. It's just not. It's not easy though, right? None of this is easy, and the truth isn't loud. The truth is quiet, right? The truth isn't flamboyant and flashy. Like the truth is reserved, But I believe those who seek the truth will find it, and I think the truth is Jesus. So I think you're on the right trajectory. Like it sounds like you're seeking and leaning into Jesus.
Yeah. When did that confidence become certainty?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd say 6 months, a year in. There's an emotional capacity to it all, right? Some people will call it the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, the goosebumps during worship, right? There's that, which is awesome. But there's the serendipitous nature of life that just goes, that does not make sense. Like, how did this happen? And then this happened, and then this aligned, and and then you start sensing what you believe is the voice of God, and you're like, I think this is God. Like, I don't think it's the bad pizza I had yesterday, right? Like, I think this is the Lord. And you start submitting to that. You start yielding to that, and you start going, okay, well, I'm going to just trust, right? So it's like I'll give you an example. Like as I started leaning into God's will for my life, I wanted to know what was God's will for my life. I discovered that God's will for my life is actually in God's ways for my life. Meaning that we want these like, what is my calling? What is my purpose, right? Because the world indoctrinates us with this like find your passion. And like, if you could get paid to do your passion, you'll never have to work a day in your life. And you could be anything you put your mind to, and all this stuff. So we think our purpose or our calling is like a destination, and God's will. And we get saved and go, what's God's will? Like, we just replace passion and purpose with God's will, calling. We just spiritualize it, and that it's a destination. I found that the will of God is more of the ways of God. It's how I do life, not where I land when I do life, right? And so in that, at the end of my high school year, I dated a girl who was older than me, and she was
Jehovah's Witness?
No, this is a little later than that. So I dated Jehovah's Witness. We broke up. I started dating the Christian girl that got me going to church. We broke up. To my senior year, I started dating a girl. I met her on the internet. She was older. She was like 21. I was 18. So we break up. We have this messy breakup. And I just said, man, I don't want to do relationships my way anymore. Like, I got to figure out how to do things God's way, right? I got to figure out, one, Proverbs says that the charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, right? And so I can't just be obsessed with like the aesthetic or the type or the look of the girl. Like, I have to go deeper to the character and the integrity and the value system and the family she came from. So I was like, okay, that's a switch based on Scripture, based on the ways of God, and which is found in the Word of God. So the will of God is in the ways of God. The ways of God are in the Word of God. Proverbs. So I'm like, let me dig deeper. And I had this conversation with God, and this is right when I graduated high school. I said, I don't want to do this anymore my way. The next person I date, I would love to marry. And I'm going to take a year off from girls. I'm not going to date any girls. And in that year, I had more girls interested in me than ever before. It was crazy. It was like multiple girls from my past and new girls and older girls. And it was a trip. And I just kind of stayed faithful. I didn't kiss them. I didn't touch their hand. I didn't hold their hand. I didn't do nothing. We hung out a couple times, girls here and there. At the end of the year, I send out an email. So this is the year after high school, right? So my freshman year of college. I'm releasing my first album. This is 2004. And I send out an email blast. And I say, hey, I'm having my first album release party. Let me know if anybody wants to help me promote it. And I don't know, I kind of had a couple hundred emails over the years, just collecting emails. I was doing this fairly early. And one person replied on that email list. And it was a girl, and she said, yeah, I'll help you pass out some flyers. I'll invite some of my friends. And she had came to a couple shows before. And I was like, okay, cool. So I remember I was at this, churches do this like graduation thing for graduates. It's not a graduation, but it's like a celebration of seniors. It's around graduation. It's a year after I graduate. And there's one of the girls that started wanting to talk to me right when I said I'm not going to date for a year. And she was the type. She was specific height, specific eye color, like everything, right? And I remember dropping off flyers there, and me and her hadn't talked, and I saw that she was a part of the ceremony. And at the same exact time, I had scheduled this gathering, this meetup with this other girl at Starbucks. And it was this like fork in the road moment. I'm going to stay here and flake on the other girl and see if I can rekindle something with this girl that was the type, right? Or I'm going to keep my word and honor my word to this other girl that I'm not really interested in, but she's the only person that replied and she wants to help, right? And I said, you know what, what would God's way be in this? God's way would be to let your yes be yes and no be no. If you say you're going to do something and be somewhere, you be there. And I went, and this was a friend, an acquaintance, and I was a little interested, but nothing like that. And I remember sitting down with her, and neither of us drank coffee at the time. And we talked for like 2 hours. She was just literally coming to grab flyers. And we talked for like 2 hours. And in that, within the first like 30 minutes, I sensed this like, this is your wife.
What was that?
I like to think it was God. I like to think it was the Holy Spirit, right? And so I get this like, this is your wife. And I'm like, okay, because like that's not what I thought, right? And fast forward a month later, we're dating. About a month and a half later, we're dating. 3 years later, I propose. 4 years later, we get married. 10 years later, we have our first kid. and we've been together 16 years, right? We have 2 kids now, 8-year-old and a 2-year-old. So the certainty comes in hindsight. The certainty comes when there's other humans here, right? Now there's other souls here that God used our union to come together to build this amazing life together, this marriage, this extended community. He's used this in so many ways as a couple, as individuals. At one point, as a couple, we took 500 people in our church through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, paid off over $1 million collectively of people's debt. Wow. So we've done so many amazing things together, and as a couple, we've done such a great net positive for our local community. But that's where the certainty comes in, right? Like, I had enough confidence to say, I'm going to do things God's ways, because I believe Jesus is who he says he is, and I believe the Bible is reliable and true. And I walked in that, and I said, I'm going to pursue relationships the way God would have me pursue relationships. So we didn't have sex, and we did, right? Like, we really did it God's ways. And in hindsight, I look back and go, man, God was in that. He is real. He's made himself real. And again, and then you think about had I gone and stayed at that meetup or the graduation ceremony at that church and not went to and kept my word, and
yeah,
it's a trip. Life's a trip like that. But that's God. That to me is the tangible the tangible hand of God in my life.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the first 10, 15 years of your life are a movie. Mm-hmm. And for you to be sitting here in this place right now is to me was the hand of God. Mm. What happened at 4 years old with your circumcision?
The circumcision story is so funny. Okay, so a little cultural context. Okay, so again, I'm Armenian. The Armenian kingdom is, it's spread all the way across to the Caspian Sea. Armenia is a small country today, nestled between Turkey and Azerbaijan. Turkey and Azerbaijan, they say one nation, 2 states, one people, 2 states. And Armenia is in between them, but we've been in that region historically for thousands of years. And so I'm born in Azerbaijan. This is under the Soviet regime. And Armenians are culturally Christian. That is our now. We, as culturally Christians, and much of the world outside of the West who are Christian, do not circumcise their kids, because when we read Galatians and the Gentiles not needing to get circumcised, they took that stuff seriously, right? Now, who knows how much of that is they're reading it now, but as a culture, we just don't circumcise. And the Arzi Muslims, because they are Muslim, they do circumcise, right? Just like the Jews circumcise. And then in America, everyone kind of circumcises for an aesthetic, right? It's not really there's no health benefits anymore to it. It's just aesthetic, right? But in that region of the world, the Middle East, if you're Jewish or Muslim, you get circumcised. If you're Christian, you don't get circumcised, right? And so I didn't get circumcised as a kid. Well, fast forward to the pogroms of Baku, and this is in the late 80s, and people can look this up, and there's basically ethnic cleansing. The Arzis, who we grew up with, who are close family and friends, all of a sudden there is this reports of Arzis being persecuted in Armenia, and they're coming back, and they're saying this, and so now they want Armenians out of Azerbaijan. And they, violence erupts, people are getting beat in the street. My dad and my grandfather and all of them, they left. They fled fairly early. My mother and I, because we're fair-skinned, because, again, my mother's adopted, genetically, I think she's Ukrainian or Russian. She was born in Moscow. But she was adopted by an Armenian family, so that's her culture, right? And I'm fair-skinned, and so we stay back. And at one point, they're doing these, they're going into houses of Armenians where they think there are Armenians based on the neighborhoods and based on what reports they've gotten. And at one point, they come into our house, and they're like, you guys are an Armenian family. And my mom was like, no, we're not. And they're like, well, that's the information we have, right? And so, who knows what's going to happen next, right? And my mom goes, no. My son is circumcised, right? And prior to that, like a year before that, what happened was I got some sort of like UTI or something. So like I wasn't circumcised up until like 4 years old. And then I like, for whatever reason, got sick and, got circumcised. And so my mom shows them my penis to prove to these Muslim Arzis that we're not Armenians and that, look at his penis. And that like de-escalated the situation and they went away,
Do you think they would have taken you or?
I don't know. I don't know what would have happened.
Like,
there was about 150 Armenians that got killed in those pogroms.
Wow.
And hundreds of thousands displaced, all over the world, right? And so I don't know. I don't know what would have happened. Yeah.
But just the fact that in that situation, an act of God could have helped.
Yeah. Well, an act of suffering to a child that, was like I was hurt because of whatever the thing was, that I think it was a UTI or something like that. And so like because of that, that caused me to get circumcised, which was more suffering.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then that caused me to potentially,
be saved.
My penis saved my family's life.
Now that's an opening hook for the episode.
Hello.
Well, here's the crazy thing, and that I think that story represents with the suffering, is suffering often leads us to prosperity and leads us to safety and leads us to incredible places. But in the moment, it's so hard for us to realize that.
Yeah, that's right.
Why is that the case?
I don't think we have any context of how usually the pathway to fulfillment is through letdown, right? And so I think we have no context of that. And I think if you're a follower of Jesus, like, you don't have to look further than the cross. Like, you don't have to look further than the greatest man, the most influential man in all of history, dies this tragic, awful, horrible death. And it doesn't make sense to his followers. The disciples are expecting a political kingdom. Like, they're expecting the Messiah, as the Jews are till this day. They're expecting a political leader. And he allows himself to be handed over. And then when they're like, nah, like, Peter's pulling out the sword, and he's like, no, like, put the sword away, So like, it doesn't make sense to them, right? And it doesn't, and that's how suffering, like, it doesn't make sense in the moment. And then on the other side of this brutal beating and crucifixion, the tomb is empty, and they.
What does that mean?
That means that he rises from the grave, that Jesus rises from the grave. That's one of the tomb being empty is a historical point that most scholars agree with, right? Like, because most people won't say like, oh yeah, Jesus, like, you can't prove the bodily resurrection in the sense of what we mean by evidence, right? In order to prove that Jesus rose, we need a time machine and a camera to go back 2,000 years and show Jesus walking around, in front of 500 people at one point for 40 days and doing all this stuff, right? But what we can know from history is that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, that they made sure he was dead, that they guarded that tomb, and that the tomb was empty. And then afterwards, and again, this is what Abar Ehrman would agree to, is that the disciples were convinced that this dude rose from the grave, to the point where they were willing to die for something that they would have known is a lie, right? Like, people would die for something under the delusion that is the truth. You're not going to die for something that you know is the lie, right? On top of which, then you have people that weren't followers of his, like his own brother James, that end up becoming his followers after the resurrection, right? So you got, if your brother claims to be the Messiah and like does all these, like, tricks and miracles, and you're like, yeah, no, man. But then, and you're not following him. Like, James did not follow Jesus. His brother didn't. And then after the resurrection, you see James become a very devoted follower of Jesus. And in Acts 15, where they're arguing, oddly enough, about the Gentiles and should they get circumcised, should they not get circumcised, should they keep the ceremonial of law, all this stuff. they all talk, but it's Paul comes to them, they all talk, Peter talks, but it's James that gives the final word, right? So James held some sort of authority in the Jerusalem church early on, right? And so you got someone that's like completely antithetical to his own brother being the Messiah, isn't one of the disciples, and then after the resurrection becomes a disciple, right? Paul, the same thing with Paul. And so I say all that to say that there's good reason to believe that the resurrection happened, and that, again, there's enough there that I could place my confidence in that event.
It also raises the point of how come the people closest to us can't see our own greatness often?
That's right.
And how do we convince or show them who we are or what we believe the potential for them is?
Yep.
To me, that's a fascinating question because so many people love so many people and they want to help bring those people to a higher plane of consciousness.
Yeah. That's called the sin of familiarity. So when Jesus goes back to his own hometown, remember Jesus leaves his hometown. He is, in this Capernaum, this city, this port city, and he's totally out of his element in Nazareth. And then he goes back to his hometown. And when he's in his own hometown, it's the one time he can't perform miracles, right? Because they're like, "Aren't you Joseph's son? Like, wasn't your dad the carpenter? Like, what are you doing?" And they said, the scriptures say he couldn't perform any miracles, so their lack of faith, and they're like trying to little bro him,
See, who else would talk about the Bible?
Right.
That's so...
But isn't it an interesting parallel to God's doing something in your life and he's giving you this vision and then these skills, and then you're executing and you're doing a podcast and you're building an audience, but then the people oftentimes closer to you totally don't get it.
Yeah.
They don't see it. It's a trip how life works that way. The hardest people to evangelize to is our closest friends and family.
Yeah.
Because they're familiar. They remember,
who you were when you came out of the womb, or,
right.
And so their image of you is still as you were.
That's right.
Whereas me and you are meeting for the first time, you're looking at me as you think I am today.
Right.
Which is a way different perspective than who I was 3 years ago, or 5 or 10.
That's right.
I also want to go to you being 8 years old, and I know that was a pivotal age for you. What happened?
Man, it's a trippy thing to talk about because my son is 8 now.
Wow.
So it kind of you know how you live your life from your perspective, and parts of it may feel like a movie, and parts of it may seem bizarre, but it's just this was normal, right? Because sometimes we can't differentiate because I'm still this, you're still that's still me.
Same
right?
consciousness.
Same consciousness, exactly. But it's a trip to see my son at 8 and then know that the stuff I went through at 8. So we moved to America. My mother and my father split 6 months after coming out here. And I find solace in the Armenian Apostolic Church, which has a beautiful, rich tradition. And I was the equivalent of an altar boy, right? And so... Which was very interesting. I got christened in the church, the whole bit, and it was our community hub, and it was how we connected interpersonally with other Armenians, and they'd have the services, and they were very intense and dark and spooky. I don't know, because it was the service was in Armenian, so it was this liturgy, and you didn't really understand what was going on, but I was a part of it. And then we had the social aspect of it, and so I was 100% down for just people, these are my people, this is cool. I don't know what church is, but I'll go. And so I become an altar boy, and they have different responsibilities for altar boys. And so I had whatever the most remedial task was, right? And then there was some kids from the same neighborhood. We were the first Armenian family to come to San Diego, and then there was more and more folks that came. And so there were some kids that came that were a couple years older. So I'm 8, they're probably 13, 14. Yeah, about 13, 14, maybe some 15. And they were on the same altar boy team as me. And I don't know what happened to them. I don't know what was going on in their life, but somehow my mom was an alcoholic, right? So she would, after my dad left, she just kind of unraveled, and my dad's not in the home, and so I'm the home that no one's at, my house, no one's there. So they would come over and we'd hang out, and then all of a sudden it escalated to them showing me gay porn, right? And straight porn and all that kind of stuff, and then it escalated to them wanting to do the acts on me, very like explicit acts on me as an 8-year-old. And then when it all came out, it was really weird because it was framed as if I, as the youngest one in that circle, was somehow like initiating this, And so then like my name as an 8-year-old gets smeared in the community as like you know what I mean? Like they like manipulated the situation.
It's interesting that the same thing happened with the gun later on.
Yeah.
We'll get to, but
yeah. And so it was really weird that, it was the actual trauma of like viewing pornographic material, right? Which I had, the first time I saw porn, I was 5, I was in Moscow. And so we went from Baku to Moscow for a while, and then we came to America. And so like there was like an intermediary time I was in Moscow, and I remember seeing porn there at the end of my favorite movie was American Ninja, and we would have it on dub, and then the movie would end, and then the credits rolled, and then like a porno came on, because it wasn't the same dub that we had back in Baku. It was like whoever we were staying with, their version of it. So I remember seeing it then, but then like now I'm seeing it, and now it's like gay stuff, which is like what in the world? Like that plumbing doesn't, you know what I mean? Like that don't seem to work correctly, And then having the acts done on me, and then having it spun in a way where I get framed as like the villain in the situation. And then like my dad is like, what happened? And I'm just like, this is what happened. He's like calling me, like asking me if it's true. And yeah, man, it was really weird. And so like that caused me to kind of remove myself from the Armenian church for a while. And I just kind of had this cloud over my life. And I remember like we had like this kind of like weird like community meeting where like all the families came together, and they were like, no, he did it. He initiated it. And I was just like, what? And I remember yelling and like trying to stand up for myself, and like nobody would stand up for me. I didn't feel like anybody stood up for me. And so that kind of set me down the path of like, all right, like this Armenian population is nuts. Like I'm done. Right. And so then like I immersed myself in the local community at the same time where like Snoop is blowing up and Dre is blowing up, and like this is like the peak of gangster rap in the 90s. Tupac just gets out of jail, and I like completely immersed myself in that. And we like, I'm in like a gang. It wasn't really a gang, but it was a gang. I'm like selling weed.
Before we get to that, I want to ask, when you were 8, when this all goes down, what did you most need?
Oh, that's a great question. Like to prevent that from happening or after it happened?
Both.
Probably prevent that. I probably just needed my dad and my mom present, Like I probably just needed like to just be doing kid stuff with my family. But they were so jacked up from all this stuff, right? Because my mom and my dad both had separate relationships back in Baku, and they were trying to work it out, but it didn't work out. And then my mom's an alcoholic, and these people were coming out of the Soviet Union, which was a dark, dark thing, right? And so one, there's already substance abuse and dysfunctional relationships. But then two, they make it out and they come to America, and they're like, we made it, but then they don't know the language, and they don't know how to navigate and how to build. Like my mom couldn't find a job for 5 years, and she spoke English.
Wow.
So we were on welfare. My dad got a job at Donovan State Prison as a cook. And then like his, my stepmom comes out, and he moves his stepmom out, and he's like starts a new family. And my mom like positions it in a way where like, don't, he's not your son anymore. Like you don't get to be a part of his life. And like he would come over, and I remember one time he come over, and my mom's new boyfriend and him fought in front of me. And then my mom took off her heel, jumped in, and like cut my dad with the bottom of her shoe. Oh and then like the police come. And she's like, tell him don't tell him I did that, because if you tell him I did that, then I'm going to go to jail. So I'm like having to lie for my mom, and my dad is like, so it's just like it was like a mess. So I think foundationally, like ideally they would have stayed together and figured it out. But at the very least, like my dad could have been, and I think he would probably concede that it was probably an impossible situation for him at the time. But like, I think he could have probably fought a little harder, to be present. But he was also starting a new family and had twins on the way, and it was a big mess, So yeah.
And then what do you need most after?
after would probably be one, to be believed and just to use your brain, right? And then two, not to like, all right, like we're gonna brush this under the rug and just like pretend it didn't happen, like, because that's what basically happens. There was no like, something like that happens now, and I feel like there's resources and people, but there's also like, they don't want CPS to get involved. They don't, you know what I mean? Like there's all these other things that they were probably scared of and didn't understand. Yeah.
It's wild how darkness from the Soviet Union made its way into your house, into your being. And I've never considered that before, but the ramifications of what a country does to its people changes the actual people even when they leave the country.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that trauma doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And that's not even like trauma as in like a trauma on your body, but there's also like mindset. Like
on your soul.
Mindset on your soul, your paradigm of the world, the zeitgeist. Like that stuff doesn't just go away. It could take a long time.
And this is what is so remarkable about you and your story is that you're healing that so that when you look, and this is why 8 is so crazy for you, is because you're looking at your 8-year-old son and you're like, that's a different reality that he's living in than I was. In so many different ways.
Right.
And you can see the growth of the soul.
Right.
We can't really like see the soul a lot of times, but you could see it in how the next generation is raised. So then what happens at 11?
So in this, like, I'm not going to hang out with the Armenians no more. I'm going to hang out with the people in my neighborhood. We start a gang, and it's me and these two other, me and this one other Armenian family that lives in my complex, and they, for the similar, I don't remember why they really rock with the church either, for whatever reason. And so we're just like, we're going to immerse ourselves in the local neighborhood, and we started selling weed and breaking into houses. That was like our thing. Like we were the people in the neighborhood that were known for breaking into people's houses
at 11 years old.
At 11 years old, and our gang leader, we had this guy hanging around us who, in hindsight, was really weird. He was 25, and
you were 11. He was 25.
I was 11. He was 25. There was a girl. There was the brother and a sister. The brother was like maybe 15, and the sister was like, she was going into her freshman year of high school. So I'm going into 6th grade. I think she's becoming a freshman in high school, something like that. It's timeline. So 5th grade, she's 8th grade. Yeah, something like that. And this 25-year-old who has a baby mom is like our gang leader, and then like he's messing with the girl, and then he gets arrested, and then his girlfriend, or she was pregnant by him at the time, is messing with this other guy, and she's like, hey, this guy has money, we can get him, our gang leader, out of jail. You guys break into this guy's house, he has money, he has this, he has that, and we can use that to bail him out of jail. Like, and all along, like, this at the same time that he, in hindsight, was grooming and molesting this girl, right? And then I end up losing my virginity to the same girl.
Wow.
At 11. So this is all within the same, I want to say this is going into my 6th grade year.
Did he get mad at you?
No, that was the weird part. Like, he didn't get mad at me. Like, it was like, yeah, well, it's all good. He was in jail. He had a baby on the way. He didn't, I think there was too much going on for him to really care, and I think he knew that he was way out of line for everything that was going on. And long story short, as we're attempting to break into this house, she's holding me up. Her brother, who's 15, is supposed to be the lookout. And I'm climbing through this bathroom window because I'm the smallest one. So like, imagine like a little small bathroom window. But these are like condos. This is right off of John Adams and 30. We grew up on 33rd, and it was one block over. So yeah, John Adams and like 31st Street, something like that, in Normal Heights. And so I'm hanging in this window, and then all I hear is screaming, ah, ah. And I'm like, what? Like, what? And they're like, get on the ground, get on the ground. So I like flop out and I turn around, and our lookout, who wasn't a great lookout, he's in this like UFC armbar on the ground in this UFC armbar because a neighbor, and it was stupid. It wasn't like this is an isolated home with a, in the middle of nowhere. Like these are, 20 condo units all in the same corridor. Like so he saw us doing this, and he was an ex-cop, came down, put my buddy in an arm bar, and I climb out of the window, and he's like, you guys got, get down. So like we weren't going to leave our guy, and we weren't like gangster enough to try to attack this grown man, because I'm 11, she's 13. Like, what are we going to do, So we get down, and yeah, dude, the cops come, and they put us in handcuffs, and they take us to this like holding cell in San Diego, and they separate us and interrogate us, and we all spilled the beans and told them exactly what was happening, and then my mom had to come and bail me out, and then we had to go to court, and it was like a thing, dude. It was like a long thing, and I didn't stop. Like we kept breaking into houses. That was the crazy part. I was on probation in 6th, 7th grade. On probation, community service hours, having to maintain a certain GPA, and like we kept just being idiots.
Yeah, this is what I don't quite understand about people who don't believe in good and evil.
Yeah,
is like anybody could look at that, and be like, "That's evil," right?
Yep.
But like that is so clear, like something in your soul.
Yeah,
my soul says like, "What is going on there?"
Right.
There's something that's not holy, like there's a lack of God in that place.
Right.
And so I guess, like, when did you make that realization?
Okay, so my 7th grade year, I think I'm now finishing probation. I ended up getting like really sick and had this weird stomach virus or something, and I like wasn't able to maintain my GPA, and so like I go back to court, and my GPA is like 1.2 or something crazy. And I had this public defender, and he's just like, yeah, it's because, he got sick and he almost died. And he like dramatizes this whole thing. But I got my community service hours in. And how I did my community service hours is the manager in our apartment complex, this lady named Cherie, who I am still in touch with till this day. Wow. Me and her son, this was my first American friend. His name is Steven Jackson, Cherie Jackson. They're amazing. They were in the life. She was in the life. She was moving cocaine. She was selling cocaine. And so she would be the one that like we would like go to concerts with. And she like took me to see Snoop and Dre at the San Diego Sports Arena when I was super young. And she ends up going to jail because she was trying to smuggle drugs in through a flight, like a lot of drugs. But for whatever reason, she ended up like not doing a lot of time. By a lot of time, I mean like a year and a half. So in the middle of me, like this entire phase of like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, she's in jail. Her son moves to San Francisco to stay with his uncle. So he's gone for a while. She comes back, and she comes back on fire for Jesus. Like on fire for Jesus.
What happened?
She just got saved in prison, dude. She's just like, and she's like a whole new person.
How?
Right? I don't know. I never really asked her, but I know that like all of a sudden there wasn't dudes coming through there. She didn't have a new boyfriend every couple months, right? Because it's like her and her boyfriend that took us to see the concert, and she was like totally on the straight and narrow, right? And so then she starts sharing the gospel, and then somehow like every other family in our complex like gets saved besides like me and this other family, and we are like, yeah, you guys are crazy. Like, there's no God. And like, if there's a God, like, he definitely doesn't love me, And because I thought I had the church experience. I know what it is. You guys are nuts.
You had all the evidence.
Yes.
For why
right.
It wasn't right.
Right. And I end up having to do community service. And my next door neighbor also gets saved. His name is Charles. And I had a really big crush on his daughter, and thankfully Charles was smart enough to keep me away from his daughter. Like I was friends with his son, but there was no like, nah, bruh. Charles was a good dad. He was a good single dad. His kids were with him most of the time. But he like kind of, him and this other guy named Willie, they were roommates, and they kind of like became my dad. Like they kind of like, they would take me to do things, and Willie was a truck driver. And so like I had these like masculine, godly men early on, and then I had to do community service hours. And so I ended up doing the community service hours at this church that they were all going to, this Black Baptist church. And I remember even then they would tell me like, you're going to do great things for Jesus someday.
Wow.
And I was like, get out of here. And they were like, just watch.
At what age?
So at this point, I'm like 10, 11, 12.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is like 6th, 7th grade while I'm doing this community service with them. And they're like, yeah, just watch. Like, God's going to get you. And I was like, you guys are nuts. Like, this is stupid. Like, I don't even want to be here. You know, and I end up, like, they're planting seeds. Cherie's planting seeds. Everyone's planting seeds, but nothing is really working. And I finished the community service. I'm hanging out. Now it's end of my 7th grade year. And I have this weird series of events. My mom gets a job in Oceanside. And now we're going to move to the North County. Now, the North County of San Diego at the time is way slower. This is the late 90s. Way slower, way more suburban, way more spread out. We're in the city. We're in Normal Heights, like houses, apartments. Like it's not super densely populated, but it's densely populated, like for San Diego at least. So my mom was like, got a job at Ocean's 11 Casino. She was driving to Viejas, which is pretty far in East County. So she gets a job in North County, and she's like, all right, like we're going to move. And she's seeing me kind of unravel. So she's like, we're going to move to Vista. And I'm like, all right. So I don't know anything about North County. And end of my 7th grade year, I end up having this situation where we break into another home. This time it was a younger kid. So we're 11, 12, 13. This kid is like maybe 8 or 9. And he's hanging out. And he has video games. And, you know, but we knew that he left the key under the doormat, you know. And we just like idiots broke in, took a lot of his mom's jewelry and video games. And it was bad. And then like we stashed it at someone else's house, like this like blood gang member at his house, and we were going to go and pawn it off and get rid of it. We had a whole plan for this stuff, and they knew it was us. I don't know how they knew it was us, but they just knew. They were like, it's you guys. Like we misjudged you. We thought you guys were better than this, but like, nope, we know it's you guys. So the mom was like sending someone, and it was sad. In hindsight, it was sad. If they're watching this, like reach out. No, I'll send you guys some money or something to make this right, because the mom was like a single mom. Like she was really trying to, you know, and like we violated them. It was.
You were operating without conscience.
Yeah.
In any sense.
I had seared my conscience as a kid. And she sent someone to like get us. So there's like people showing up to our apartment complex. Thankfully they built gates. So like San Diego was getting pretty rough. So they built gates. So before, when we moved in, there was no gate. Now there's like a gate, and you had to like have a key or a code to get in or something. So they couldn't get in, thankfully. But there was like dudes pulling up multiple times a week with a baseball bat, like that were going to get me. And they were maybe like 16, 17 years old, right? And at the same time, 7th grade year, there's a Samoan kid who we were friendly, we would hang out, and he shows up to school one day and he's like, hey, like, let me show you something. And he pulls up in his bag, and I do not remember seeing this, but apparently he had a gun on him. And so he like flashes this gun, and I'm just like, nah, you're full of it. Like, that's not a real gun. Like, I don't recall seeing it. Maybe if I saw it, I thought it was like a pellet gun or something. Because that's one thing we weren't doing, is we weren't playing with guns. We didn't have access to guns, which was huge, right, in hindsight, because who knows how bad things could have gone. And he's like, no, it's a gun. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I like ignore it. And then like a couple days later, I get called into the principal's office. And I'm like, wow, like, well, this is weird. Like, I've never been called into the principal's office. And then there's like 2 detectives there in the principal's office, and they're like, hey, so-and-so got caught with the gun. He got expelled, and he's telling us that it was your gun. And I'm like, nah, man, like, no, like, this is not my gun. They're like, well, we pulled up your record, and we saw that you're on probation, and yada, yada, yada. And I'm just like, no, like, that's not my gun. Like, you're not gonna get me to confess to this gun. Like, you guys are insane, you know? And they're like, full on interrogation mode. I'm in 7th grade. right? And these two detectives are in like the principal's not in there. And they're just like grilling me like it's an interrogation. And just like, no. And so I remember at one point I got up and I yelled, "That's not my effing gun. You can run the fingerprints and you'll see that it's not my gun." And their response was, "We're going to run the fingerprints and we're going to know, and we're going to find your fingerprints on it. We're going to know it's your gun." And I was like, do it. And then I left.
Wow.
So fast forward this last week of school. It's not the end of school, but it's like around May. School ends in June. And there's this weird series of events where like this guy's looking for me with a baseball bat. The jewelry that we stashed at this gang member's house magically goes missing. No one knows what happened to it. This is missing. So there's no getting rid of the jewelry. And the kid who showed me the gun, this big Samoan kid, is walking up El Cajon Avenue. I'm walking from Wilson Middle School. And I'm like, "Yo, what's up? Like, what happened?" You know, I'm not thinking anything about anything. I'm just like, why did you say? Like, what's going on? And so he says to me, "Why did you snitch on me?" And I remember it as clear as day. I remember seeing his face, and I remember glancing, and I'm like, this dude has a knife. And I'm like, thank God he's Samoan and big, and I am slender and sleek like a gazelle. And I ran for my life down El Cajon Avenue as he's trying to chase me. He only got a couple steps in before he winded out. he wasn't going to keep up with me. And dude, I ran for my life, and like within the next week or two, definitely within the week, we end up moving and we come to North County, San Diego. I get a fresh start, reset. And at that point I knew I can't keep doing this. Like, I'm not going to be this kid no more.
How did you have that realization? Because it would have been very easy for you to go to a new school, a new situation, and live in the same pattern.
I think I was looking for a fresh start. I think subconsciously I was looking for, because I think a lot of people are like that, man. Like, I think we can really dismiss people that grow up in that environment and the life and the gangs and all that kind of stuff. But like the reality is like in the moment, it feels like this is my environment. This is all I know. But I think when I got a fresh start, I was like, I'm taking this. So I just immersed myself in basketball. My GPA went from 7th grade year. I thought I was going to redo the 7th grade in Vista. Like, I was like, there's no way they're going to pass me. Like, this is, I failed out. Like, I'm talking 1.0 GPA. And somehow they let me into 8th grade. And my first semester in 8th grade, my GPA went from 1.0 to 3.8.
Crazy. So
I like completely turned around education-wise, right?
What'd your mom say about that, by the way?
I mean, she was proud, like she was pumped, and that like I was showing interest in something besides like being an idiot, and so she was pumped on that, and so yeah, man. So like I turned it around, and then like freshman year, I'm not walking with Jesus. I'm just not trying to be a bad kid anymore. Freshman year, I'm doing music. There's still like what I didn't know is that the neighborhood I moved in, they had just cleared out. It was a neighborhood. There's a bunch of Crip gangs, but there's two gangs in North County, one of which at the time was West Side. West Side Crip was in Oceanside, and then they had a spinoff called 187 Crip in the neighborhood that I had just moved into, and they had just cleaned this neighborhood up. So they just took all these guys away, and so I moved into this neighborhood that I don't know, unbeknownst to me, was just a gang neighborhood. And then these guys start coming home, and so there's other guys around, and so I'm kind of like dabbling, making music. I'm still friendly with some of these guys till this day. Some of them got saved. And so like I start doing music. I do my first show the end of my freshman year, and I win this like talent show contest at Bringo Terrace Park. And that night I meet a girl who was really into me, and she, in order to hang out with her on Sundays, I had to go to church with her and her family. And that's how I started going to church. No desire to follow Jesus, no desire for anything. But I just went for social reasons, and you just kind of hear it, and I'm like, okay, all right, and she was very bold in her faith, oddly enough, even though she was dating me, who I'm not a Christian, and, we're sexually immoral. And so, yeah, man, so it's like after that, dated a Jehovah's Witness girl, 9/11 happens in the same window of time. I'm like, what is going on with the world? And I wrestle with God. And finally, at the end of my at the end of my junior year, I finally surrendered my life to God. So freshman year, the end of my freshman year, all of my sophomore year, and then my junior year, I finally give my life to Jesus. Get into a church, get into a small group, start like really leaning into reading my Bible. I stopped dating that girl and just like started trying to, turn my life around.
Is it hard for you to talk about all this? Like, or how does it sit with you today?
No, not hard. I would say now it's just like, it's interesting. It's interesting, like how much of what I do now is probably driven by the hurt and the trauma, and like having the immigrant thing, which is like the immigrant thing is like that you just have a whole different paradigm of America because you're like, dude, like America's far from perfect, but come on, I remember food rations. Like I remember lining up for food rations. I remember my family would get a tub of water to share amongst ourselves for bathing for a week. Wow. And having to like make that work, right? I'm not talking like my mom and my dad and me. I'm talking like my grandparents were with me too. So I remember communism, and I remember coming to America, and the first place we went to was a Lucky's grocery store off of El Cajon Boulevard in the 805. And I remember thinking, oh, that's so sweet. They took me to a toy store. Like we landed and like, they're so thoughtful. Like they took me to a toy store. Like this is how it should be. And it was like the grocery store looked like a toy store to me.
Oh my God.
It was so colorful and pretty and beautiful, and I was like, this is a trip. Like this is it, dude. This is awesome, and seeing like my mom like get a job and like figure it out and get off of welfare, and then seeing my dad like go from being a cook at a prison to like building a business. And I'm like, dude, this is awesome. So I have that going for me, like that paradigm, which I'm like, talk about being fortunate in like perspective and privilege. Like that is a huge superpower, right? Is having a global perspective on things and understanding how lucky we really are and how blessed we really are. Blessed is the better word than lucky. And then seeing the complete and utter darkness that can come over me and can come over people, and understanding how these things can really manifest and they aren't without consequence. And so, so like all these things that like on the surface were bad ended up being used to like fuel me, and not just fuel me for like monetary success and money and all that kind of stuff, notoriety, but like to become a whole person, like to go and work through this stuff, to go to therapy, to get in a small group, get accountable, become a responsible, competent man. Like all these things were the fire and the fuel to help me become functional,
Yeah. It's so interesting you brought up that point, because this was one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about. Mm-hmm. The important journey for a person to go through is dysfunctional to functional to flourishing.
That's right.
And when you said that, something clicked for me.
Yeah.
Of just like, oh, that's what I'm doing with this podcast. That's what I'm doing by asking these questions. That's what all human beings are doing if they're on the path.
Right. Yeah, I think people want to skip steps. And anyone that knows that it's really about the process, right? Like it's an infinity game. Whatever it is you're trying to do, right? It's not like a basketball game or a football game. Like we're playing for the long haul. So there's no end to what we're doing in terms of I want to become the best version that God created me to be. My therapist, Dr. Rudy, says allowing the Holy Spirit in conjunction with you to chisel you like a statue, right? Like you start as this like just brick of just cement or whatever, and then like being chiseled into something beautiful, and that process is painful, but that is in my opinion, like that is the process of becoming functional, right? And so I had that word for my family at the beginning of the year. I sat down everybody in my family and I was like, look, like I think God has amazing things for all of you, right? But we all come, this is my wife's side of the family as well, right? Like we all come from stuff and we all have scars and issues, but like we have to go from dysfunctional to functional first. And if we go from dysfunctional to functional first, then we can go to flourishing. But if you try to skip being functional to flourishing. You skip that step of just being competent, stable, consistent. The flourishing can ruin you, right? Like Proverbs says, an inheritance attained too early in life is not a blessing in the end.
Yeah, like lottery winners.
Lottery winners, that's right. Lottery winners, professional athletes.
They haven't maintained that middle step.
Right.
And that's such an important piece of the pie. Where do you view yourself on that spectrum?
I mean, I'm always striving to become more functional, and I'm always striving to deal with the redirecting the darkness into light, and leaning into that and allowing God to continue working on me, right? And not losing sight that is the byproduct. Now, the flourishing part, like money just buys you freedom, right? So like I'm making great money and it's awesome, but all that is just flexibility and freedom, right? Like flexibility to go to London and Paris and New York with my family. Mm-hmm. Like that's all it is, right? Like it's a tool. But you don't, if you have tools that you aren't capable of handling, you can hurt yourself, right? Yes. And I see a lot of people do that. Like I see a lot of people attain a lot of wealth and then the wealth ends up attaining them. And so the flourishing part is cool. Like, yes, I'm flourishing financially. I would say I'm flourishing in my family and my marriage. But again, it's not a destination. It's how much better can I make my marriage? And how much closer can we be? How much more present can I be as a dad? How much, right? And those are long play things that are not a destination. It's a journey.
Yeah, and I really love what you said before about how we view calling mm-hmm. and how we think about our calling and we think about our passion or purpose. Mm-hmm. What struck me when you said that was that we often think about it in terms of career mm-hmm. and we think about your purpose has to be your career.
Right.
It's like, what if your purpose is the data? This is what Deion Sanders taught me.
Yep.
Is like, your purpose is how you show up.
Yep.
Your purpose is how much presence you have.
That's good.
And I'm like, whoa, like that, if you live like that, your life becomes better.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think we're conditioned in America, unfortunately, to think that your value and your calling, your purpose is your work, is what you do for work. And not just work, what you contribute to the marketplace in a monetary sense. And the reality is that my wife is a stay-at-home mom. She helps out with our business. She does the books and she does a little bit of freelance stuff. But like her primary thing is educating our kids. That does not add to America's GDP directly, But that's one of the most important callings you could have, is to be a mother and to be a parent and to be a shepherd and to pastor your children. You don't measure that from monetary aspects. And it's interesting because only in America do we meet people and within the first encounter we ask them what they do for work.
What do you do?
What do you do? I've traveled enough. I've been to Paris. I've been to Rome. I've been to Israel. People outside of America don't ask that question. Like sometimes you could be friends with somebody and not know what they do for work, right? Like what a trip that is, right? But we're so defined by our like literal output and contribution to the GDP, and we allow that to define our worth. And it sucks because I think we're much more than that. Now I think you should contribute to the marketplace and crush it and kill it financially as well. But I think there's more than that.
Yeah, absolutely there is. It's interesting because you talked about your wife and talked about being saved, but that didn't fix all of your problems. Mm-hmm. Like you talked about being in your 30s and having trouble with porn and dealing with that.
Yep.
How did you reconcile looking at some of your issues, even though you had an example for like the model that you were trying to hit?
Yeah. Well, I think there's the reality of I am still broken. Like I'm still a sinner, right? Like Jesus imputes his righteousness to me because of the cross, right? It says that we are the righteousness of God if we're in Christ Jesus. He no longer calls me sinner. He sees me as a saint, right? That I'm no longer a broken individual He calls us his disciples, his friends. This is, by the way, very unique to Christianity. Like, if you look at other religions, like the best you could hope for is to be a slave to God, right? In Christianity, Jesus is like, you're now my friends, which is a trip to think about. And so there are certain things that God can definitely just zap and you're just fixed. Like that can happen. And it does happen to some people. I know people that have been on hard drugs and they have an encounter with God and cold turkey, they're done. Wow. And then there's other people like myself, man, where like for whatever reason, I had issues that stayed with me. And they're a process, and sometimes I have to figure out why these things are there, and I had to get to the root of it and connect it to my childhood. And I don't know why. Like I wish God could have just taken some of those things away, but He didn't. But it did allow me to connect so much more with other people and to share that story and to be vulnerable in that way, which a lot of people are afraid to talk about, especially as like, no. The brokenness followed me into my teenage years, which created these compulsive addictions with porn that then followed me in my marriage, and that's like icky to talk about, like being a dude who's addicted to porn and you're married as a Christian. It's a mess, but it's so prevalent and it's so common. And I think talking about that, and not just talking about it, but like me and my therapist created mastermyhabits.com, which is a very simple way of walking people to freedom-forming habits. Because a lot of times we can dislike an aspect of ourselves. We could say, oh, that's gross. I can't believe I do this. I'm so ashamed. And okay, fine. But we're not moving to anything, right? So if we can move to and practice the law of replacement, then you could repent of like, this is not okay. Because one, I'm harming myself. I'm harming God. I'm potentially enabling an entire industry that traffics people, right? Because there's a lot of correlation there, and I got friends like Exodus Cry that do work in that world. So I'm potentially like really contributing to darkness at scale, and I have to work through these things, right? And so like I have to repent of this, I have to reveal it, I have to remove it, I have to kill it, but I need to replace it with something else. Right. And so like we put together a course called mastermyhabits.com. It's free. People can go through it. And it just kind of walks people through like a way to find freedom in this area. Right. And I think like, I don't know, like I don't like comparing myself to biblical characters because like I think that's kind of weird. But like I think of Paul writing that like he had a thorn in his flesh. Right. Like he prayed God would take it away. And people think it was an ailment, a sickness. But sometimes like it just feels like, man, like God will allow certain things, even though I have the responsibility. It's ultimately on me to wage war on my sin, but like God would allow certain things and they end up being used for His glory. Like that which the enemy meant for evil, God can use for good.
Yeah. And it's so remarkable too, how you're willing to talk. You're willing to ask the questions to and have the open dialogues with people who are sinners, right? In your words, I guess.
Yeah.
But like do it, like I was looking at the Whatever podcast you did and on Valuetainment as well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the way in which you're talking to people who do things that you disagree with is with so much kindness and compassion.
Yeah.
And it was very cool to see. I really appreciated that.
Yeah. I think sometimes Christians do a bad job, not just Christians, people do a bad job of dehumanizing other people they disagree with. And at the end of the day, as someone that is very flawed and is, my life oftentimes feels like a mosaic of a bunch of broken pieces that God is making something with that's even better than where I started. I can just have compassion for people, but I like love them enough to accept them where they are. But God has so much more. So talking to Adam22 on a Whatever podcast, and I've been on No Jumper as well. It's like, hey man, like you don't have to just be the heel. Like you don't have to just be the villain that like makes content that's like kind of sketchy and messy, and then like allows his wife to like be, in a adult movie with another dude. Like you don't have to just be this guy. Like you guys could turn this all around and you could really go a different direction. And what an example we would say. I don't think anyone's telling him that. Like I don't think anyone's seeing that in him and encouraging him that. And also just saying, but like you should do that because like that's an amazing story arc. But like you should do that because Jesus is real. Yeah. Like Jesus is true, and Jesus' plan for you is better than your plan for you. And I think that's something that whether you're OnlyFans model or in adult film, or whether you're just a dude that's trying to build your castle instead of God's kingdom, like I think that's true for all of us. Like there are people that aren't deplorable sinners, and like, but they are narcissists and they are greedy and they are consumed with ego, right? And those people need Jesus too. Yeah, those people need Jesus too.
Yes, and it's what's so cool is you talking to Adam22 about like, would you want your child to do this?
Right.
And that is the greatest way to hit at somebody.
Yeah.
Is like, what do you want for the next generation? Right. And why are you not living in that?
Right.
That pushes us forward. And you seem to be doing that.
Yeah. And again, like I think the important thing is and I'm always really striving, especially in my own content, to not dehumanize people, because it could be hard when you disagree with someone so strongly. Yeah. And that's why I think like a lot of times the conversations are better in person.
Yes.
So like if I'm talking to someone I disagree with, like I'd rather not do that. I intentionally will not react to something that I disagree too strongly with, because I know that it may come off condescending and mean, And so, and I try to make an effort to have a wide spectrum and diverse group of friends, and really try to hear both perspectives, because it could be different. You could easily get into your own silo and your own echo chamber, especially as like a Christian content creator.
Yeah.
And then you're just like in this own little bubble, and everyone believes everything you believe and holds all the same things you, and then like not just that, but like the type of theology you're into and the type of church you just become the thing that frustrates you about everyone else that doesn't know Jesus, right? That you're now so immersed in your own paradigm that you detach from where the average person is.
Yeah. Why has seemingly God and Jesus made its way more into popular culture and sports in the past 5 years?
I think because God's up to something. I think too many Christians hold this doom and gloom. God just, checked out of the world, and he's just only concerned with Christians, and that's it. And so this is historical. This is probably within the last 100 years. This is where the lines between the different camps, specifically like the fundamentalist crowd, have kind of overlapped with what I would identify with as like the neo-evangelicals. So if I'm talking neo-evangelical, I mean Chuck Smith, I mean Jesus Revolution, I mean Greg Laurie, I mean Billy Graham. Like that's kind of the stream that I'm coming from. I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of those names. Jesus Revolution, Greg Laurie just had a big movie made about his life called Jesus Revolution, about the hippie revival 50 years ago. And the times, man, so similar as what's happening today.
Wow.
Middle of the Vietnam War, Martin Luther King gets assassinated, JFK gets assassinated. Like it's a dark time in American history. And then God just starts saving hippies. Like these hippies get saved, and they get with this guy named Chuck Smith, who is a small Bible pastor, and like this Calvary Chapel movement explodes. And then the Calvary Chapel movement then goes on to plant Harvest Church, which Greg Laurie, who's an amazing pastor in Southern California, has Harvest Church and Harvest Crusade, which they do these massive crusades, and he's had over 7-8 million people come out to those over the years. Then out of that, you kind of get the Calvary Chapel movement, the Vineyard movement. All these different movements come out of this like really interesting like hippie revolution, right? That all these folks get saved. Like the Renaissance in art, Christian art and music, it's good. Like I don't know if you saw, I did a video about Joe Rogan singing a Jesus song.
I saw
He
that.
called it a pro-Jesus song, and that's a song from that movement. That's a song.
You did the whole breakdown of where that comes from.
Yeah. So it was like that. So it was like that movement and that revival. And this is, Johnny Cash is getting saved at this time. A lot of people, Bob Dylan, like it's a very interesting time in culture, right? Alice Cooper.
You're like, this guy, he wrote the song directly to Joe Rogan.
Yeah, seriously, man. Yeah. And so I think God's up to something, dude. I think God's up to something. I think sometimes Christians can get in the way of that, because like we're like so, and it's not Christians, it's it's a specific stream of Christian that like removes himself from culture, runs from the city, runs from the marketplace, runs from the institutions. And what's beautiful about what's happening is there are Christians that are either already in the institutions getting saved, like they weren't Christian and now they are Christian, or in art and in media, or there are people that are, God is miraculously just infiltrating these different pockets of media and sport, like a Deion Sanders in sports, right? Just how unapologetic he is about his faith. And you're starting to see this more and more. And so I think God is up to something. I think God is up to something. And it's going to look weirder to the fundamentalist Christian crowd because God's going to use does use a bunch of crooked sticks to draw straight lines. Like he's going to use a bunch of people that are broken that like, yeah, like we can nitpick apart any of our lives and be like, oh, this dude does this or he believes this, right? But ultimately like pointing people to Jesus. And so, yeah, I see the darkest time, right? And then the light comes, then the sun rises, right? And I think that we are on the precipice of something big personally, you know, and I don't think it's going to feel religious in the same way that the hippie movement, it didn't feel religious, but it was unapologetically about Jesus and his word.
Yeah, I feel that from you, and I feel that from the culture in general. It's really cool to see as somebody who's been outside church, outside faith for a long time, but like being drawn into it in so many ways by so many people, and you included. So thank you for spending the time here today and really what you're doing online. Like it's really special. So
yeah, man.
I like to end these podcasts with challenges, or I ask the guest for a challenge to leave the audience with so that they can take the learnings or something that we've talked about from the past hour and a half and actually do something with it.
Yeah.
Does a challenge come to mind?
Absolutely. Before I even fully placed my faith in Jesus, is interesting. One of the things I was challenged on, that I still challenge people on, is to read the book of Proverbs and read the chapter of Proverbs that the day is. So today is the 16th.
Yeah.
So read chapter 16 today. Right? Even if you're like, I don't know about this whole Jesus thing. Like, I don't know about like the resurrection. Man, that sounds like magic. Like, what are we talking about, Ruslan? Start reading the book of Proverbs and just read the chapter of the day that it is. And pray that God will reveal himself to you. Ask, like literally, Jesus, if you are who you say you are, if you really did what you say you did and what history testifies you did, reveal yourself to me. And try reading Proverbs for a day, for a month, and tell me that doesn't completely just unlock something inside of you. And I think if most people who do that, they go, whoa, this is, in the words of Jordan Peterson, this is truer than true. You know, like this is so much of our civilization is built on the Proverbs, right? And so anyway, I'm also working on creating like a devotional of like Proverbs into like some of the sayings of Jesus. And so for every day of the month, there'd be Proverbs chapter 1, and then I'm going to tie it into something Jesus said just to kind of bridge that gap. So I'm working on that. That'll be available as like a free PDF, and then we'll have a physical of that as well. But yeah, man. So that's that I would say that like try Proverbs and see what happens.
I'm going to do that because it hasn't been approachable for me for a long time, and I love Proverbs, and I'm going through it right now. But to tie to the date is very helpful.
It's just if you don't know what to read, right? Because people are like, "What should I read?" And then sometimes people are like, "I'm going to do the Bible in a year," and then you get into like numbers, and you're like, "Whoa, this is harder than I thought it was," right?
Yeah.
But
it's like going to the gym.
It's like
for
going
your
to the
mind,
gym.
for your spirit, for your soul.
Yes, and so it's like, I'd rather someone go to the gym and work out for 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day and just get there than like, I'm going to get on this perfect plan and do an hour in the gym, right? Because it's just getting there. So like Proverbs, you don't got to think about what you're going to read. It's fairly short and it's really rich and robust.
It's insightful.
Yeah.
It's really insightful.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the time. Where should we send people to connect with you and everything you got going on?
They could just Google Ruslan KD on all platforms. I'm pretty easy to find. And shoot me a DM. I actually read a lot of my DMs and respond to a lot of them. So if there's anything you have questions on or I can clarify, reach out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thank you, brother.
Really appreciate you.
This was fun.